By the time I reached the ranger station, snow had already started swallowing the road behind me. Not enough to be dramatic yet, just a steady white curtain drifting through the pines, softening the tire tracks I had followed for the last 6 miles and making the whole mountain feel farther from civilization than it had on the map. Cole Mercer was waiting outside when I pulled in. He was taller than I expected, broad-shouldered beneath a dark winter field jacket, with the kind of stillness that made me feel as if he had already noticed everything about me before I had even shut off the engine. "You're Bennett. Noah's fine." His gaze dropped briefly to my duffel, then to the sky. "Bring your gear inside first. Weather's moving faster than forecast." That was my introduction to my new supervisor. No welcome speech, no small talk, just instructions. Inside, the station was practical and spare. Radios, maps, equipment racks, a wood stove already burning hard enough to take the edge off the cold. Cole showed me where emergency supplies were stored, which radio channel we would use, what equipment I was responsible for checking, and exactly what he expected from a seasonal assistant working a winter post. He spoke like someone who had learned long ago that details mattered. I was halfway through wondering whether he ever relaxed when I noticed an extra pair of insulated gloves laid beside my assigned gear. "Those mine. Station issue. They look new." "They are." He had also set aside boot warmers and a heavier outer layer in my size. I looked at him. "You always prepare this much for temporary staff?" Cole adjusted the radio on the desk without meeting my eyes. "I prepare for weather." It should have sounded dismissive. Somehow it didn't. The radio crackled before I could answer. Cole listened, his expression sharpening. A vehicle farther down the access route had already turned back. Snowfall was intensifying, visibility dropping, and the road was becoming unsafe faster than anyone expected. When the transmission ended, I glanced toward the window. "You think I should head back?" "No," the answer came immediately. Cole crossed to the glass and looked out at the white gathering between the trees. "You'd be driving into worse conditions. You stay here tonight." Tonight. I had signed up to spend weeks working beside a forest ranger I had never met. Somehow, one sentence made the arrangement feel completely different. Outside, the road disappeared beneath fresh snow. Inside, Cole checked the locks, added another piece of wood to the stove, and handed me a mug from the counter. "Get comfortable, Noah." I took it, watching snow erase the last visible tracks leading away from the station. For the first time, I wondered how long it would be before either of us could leave. By morning, the windows looked as though someone had packed them in white. I found Cole at the table with the radio beside him and a mug in one hand. He glanced up when I entered, already dressed for outside. "Road. Closed. For how long?" "Depends on the storm." That was apparently all the uncertainty Cole Mercer was willing to discuss before breakfast. He had already made a list of what needed checking around the station. Heating, communications, outdoor equipment, snow accumulation near the access points. He walked me through each task with the same precise tone he had used the night before. Then he reached the last item. "I'll handle the outside checks." I looked at him. "We'll handle them. Noah. I'm your assistant." The word suggests assisting. His mouth tightened slightly. "You arrived yesterday, and somehow survived the night. This isn't about surviving the station. Then stop talking to me like I'm going to wander into the woods and freeze because nobody explained snow." For several seconds, he just stared at me. Then something almost like amusement appeared in his eyes. "Put on the heavier layer." I knew there'd be a condition. There are always conditions. Outside, the cold hit hard enough to make my first breath hurt. Snow had transformed everything. The access road was barely distinguishable from the surrounding ground, and the pines sagged beneath thick white weight. Cole moved through it with practiced efficiency while I followed, checking what he showed me and refusing every opportunity to complain. Unfortunately, that seemed to make him watch me more. "You warm enough?" "Yes." 10 minutes later, hands still attached. Later again, he looked directly at my face. "Any numbness?" I stopped. "What?" "You've asked me if I'm cold 3 times. Because it's cold." You haven't asked yourself once. I know whether I'm cold. So do I. Cole studied me, snow collecting along his shoulders. I'm responsible for you. There it was. The obvious explanation. I should have accepted it. Instead, I said, "You planning to count my fingers every 10 minutes too?" His eyes narrowed. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was brief enough that I almost missed it, but it changed his entire face. "Only if you stop answering intelligently." "Good. I'll lower the standard immediately." The smile disappeared, though not completely from his eyes. We finished the checks without another argument. By the time we stepped inside again, my boots were covered in snow and my pride was annoyingly satisfied. Cole waited until I had removed my gloves before looking at my hands. I caught him doing it. 10 fingers, I said, holding them up. A remarkable success. You joke when you're irritated. You supervise when you're worried. His expression changed just enough to tell me I had landed closer than expected. He turned toward the equipment rack. "We have more work." But the rest of the morning felt different. He stopped giving me only the easiest tasks. I stopped treating every instruction like a challenge. Somewhere between checking equipment and keeping the station running, we found a rhythm that was less supervisor and inexperienced assistant, more two people trying to make the same difficult day work. The storm continued outside. By afternoon, the radio offered no useful estimate for reopening the road. I should have been thinking about how inconvenient that was. Instead, I kept remembering Cole smiling at me in the snow, and wondering why being watched by him had stopped feeling entirely like supervision. By the second afternoon, Cole stopped hovering. Not completely. I doubted the man knew how. But when we went through the station checks again, he handed me part of the equipment list instead of standing over my shoulder while I worked through it. "Check these yourself," he said. "Tell me if anything looks wrong." I took the list. "No finger count afterward?" "That depends on your performance." There he is. His mouth twitched, but he walked away. It should not have felt like an accomplishment. It did. I worked carefully, partly because the conditions demanded it and partly because I wanted Cole to discover that trusting me had not been a mistake. When we compared our checks later, he looked over my notes without correcting anything. "All good?" I asked. "All good." That sounded painful. "You want praise?" I'd settle for visible astonishment. "You followed instructions. I knew you'd find a way to ruin it." This time, the smile stayed for more than a second. Something between us had shifted. Not dramatically. The storm still controlled our schedule, the road was still buried, and Cole was still technically the man responsible for me. But he no longer seemed determined to prove he could handle everything alone. And I no longer felt like I had to fight him every time he tried to help. By evening, our work was finished. There was nothing forcing either of us to remain in the common room. Cole could have disappeared into his own space. I could have done the same. Neither of us moved. I sat near the stove while Cole finished updating his notes at the table. For several minutes, the only sounds were the fire and wind pushing against the building. Then he stood and went toward the counter. "You want coffee?" I looked up. "At this hour?" "You complained this morning that station coffee wasn't strong enough." I said it tasted like warm disappointment. "You drank 2 cups. I was desperate." He opened a cabinet and reached past the regular container. "What's that?" "Something stronger." I stared at him. Cole glanced over his shoulder. "What?" "You remembered. You weren't subtle. That's different from remembering." He turned back to the counter, but I caught the faintest change in his expression. A few minutes later, he handed me the mug and took the chair across from mine instead of returning to his paperwork. That bothered me more than it should have. Not because I wanted him to leave, because I didn't. I took a drink. "Okay, that's annoyingly better. I'll survive your gratitude." We sat there while the snow continued beyond the windows. No task keeping us together anymore. Eventually I asked, "What happens if this gets worse?" "We manage. I mean with temporary staff. If a station can't support them." Cole's eyes lifted to mine. "I assume people can get transferred somewhere better equipped." A pause. Small but unmistakable. Sometimes. So if this place becomes impossible, somebody moves me? His fingers tightened slightly around his mug. If conditions require it. There was something unusually careful in the answer. Before I could ask what, Cole nodded toward the window. Right now nobody's moving anywhere. The subject was closed. At least for him. But later, when I finally stood to leave the common room, Cole stayed where he was. Good night, Noah. Night. I made it several steps before looking back. He was watching the fire now, expression unreadable. Maybe his reaction to the transfer question meant nothing. Maybe the coffee meant nothing too. But the storm had forced us into the same station. It had not forced Cole to remember exactly how I liked something. And it definitely had not forced either of us to spend the evening sitting together after there was no work left to do. That night, the storm stopped sounding distant. Wind struck the station in heavy bursts, pushing snow against the windows until the darkness outside became a shifting wall of white. Cole checked the radio again, then the stove, then the windows, moving through the room with the controlled concentration I had already learned meant he was worried. I had also learned better than to ask him whether he was worried. Instead, I looked toward the hallway. So this is the exciting ranger lifestyle they advertised? Cole glanced at me. You saw an advertisement? I'm trying to make your career seem glamorous. You're failing. Give me time. Another gust rattled the building. Cole looked toward the window before pulling the second chair closer to the stove. We stay in here tonight. I raised an eyebrow. Together. It's the warmest room, right? Thermodynamics. Very professional. His stare lasted a second too long. Exactly. That one word changed the air between us. There were no more checks to perform for the moment, nowhere useful to go, nothing left to hide behind except conversation. For a while, we listened to the storm. Then Cole asked, "Why this job?" "I needed work." "That's not what I asked." I looked at him over my mug. Apparently, the quiet ranger had been paying attention to my evasions too. "I've quit things before they had the chance to become difficult," I said finally. "Jobs, places, plans. Why? Leaving early means you never have to find out whether you would have failed." Cole leaned back slightly, watching me. "That why you came here?" "Partly. I wanted to prove I could stay somewhere uncomfortable long enough to see what happened." His gaze held mine. "And?" I glanced toward the snow-covered window. "Ask me when the road opens." Something shifted in his face, then disappeared. I smiled faintly. "Your turn." "My turn for what?" "Personal disclosure. I believe that's how conversations work." "I told you I'm a ranger." "That was in my employment paperwork." Cole looked almost offended by the concept of volunteering information. I laughed. He didn't, but his expression softened. That was becoming dangerous. Not the storm, not the isolation. The fact that I was beginning to recognize versions of him nobody had introduced me to. A quieter Cole. A funny Cole, though he would probably deny that one under oath. A man who remembered my coffee and watched my hands after we came in from the cold. Another hard gust hit the station. I instinctively turned toward the window at the same moment Cole leaned forward. His hand closed around my forearm. There was no reason for it to stay there. We both knew that. The building settled almost immediately, but Cole's fingers remained around my sleeve. I looked down at his hand, then up at him. He released me. Neither of us spoke. The silence afterward was different from every silence before it. I swallowed. You know, for somebody determined to keep everything professional, you're making this confusing. Cole's jaw tightened. I'm responsible for you. You've said that. It matters. So does whatever that was. His eyes stayed on mine. For one suspended second, I thought he might answer. Instead, he stood and crossed to the radio. I let out a breath and stared into the stove. After a moment, I said, "You seemed pretty familiar with transfer procedures yesterday." Cole went still. "Experience. With temporary assistance? With staffing?" The answer came too quickly. I turned toward him. "So if the road hadn't closed, moving me somewhere else would have been simple?" His back remained to me. "Not simple, But possible. A longer pause. Under the right circumstances. Before I could push further, he finally faced me. Noah. There was warning in my name, but something else beneath it. Not anger. Fear, maybe. Not of the storm. Of whatever was happening between us. I didn't ask again. Cole returned to the chair beside mine, though he could easily have chosen somewhere farther away. Our shoulders were separated by inches. Neither of us closed the distance. Neither of us increased it. Outside, the snow kept us trapped in the station. Inside, for the first time, I was beginning to suspect the dangerous part wasn't being unable to leave. It was how little I wanted to. The storm was still hammering the station when Cole finally broke the silence. You should get some sleep. I looked at him from the chair beside the stove. You've been saying versions of that all night. And you've been ignoring them. Maybe I'm waiting for you to stop pretending. His expression hardened slightly. Pretending what? I should have backed off. Instead, I looked at the hand that had been around my arm minutes earlier, then back at him. That everything you do is because you're responsible for me. Cole became very still. You check whether I'm warm. You remember what I drink. You stay here when there's no work left. You sit close enough that I can barely think, then act like I imagined it. Noah. There. You do that too. Do what? Say my name like it's supposed to end the conversation. His jaw tightened. I stood, not to move toward him, just because sitting there suddenly felt impossible. If I'm wrong, tell me. Cole looked up at me. The wind pushed hard against the station walls, but neither of us glanced toward it. You're not wrong. The words were quiet. For a second, I genuinely forgot what I had planned to say next. Cole stood too, leaving only a few feet between us. But that doesn't make this simple. Because you're my supervisor. Yes. And because we're trapped here. Yes. At least we finally agree on something. This isn't funny. I know. That erased whatever defensive humor I had left. Cole took a slow breath. You work under me. You can't drive out of here. You don't have another place to go tonight. Those things matter whether we want them to or not. I watched him carefully. What do you want? His eyes met mine. The answer was there before he spoke. You. One word. No explanation to hide inside. No professional excuse. My heartbeat went painfully loud. Then stop acting like wanting me is something only I'm allowed to notice. Cole took one step closer. He stopped before touching me. You understand why I'm hesitating? Yes. And if you tell me to stop, I will. He searched my face one last time. Then he kissed me. There was nothing accidental about it. His hand came carefully to the side of my face, giving me every possible second to move away. I didn't. I caught the front of his jacket and kissed him back. For days, every look and unfinished sentence seemed to collapse into that single moment. Then Cole pulled away. Not abruptly. Not because he regretted it. That almost made it worse. His forehead hovered close to mine as he exhaled. We stopped there. I stared at him. Seriously. Yes. You kiss me and immediately become Ranger Mercer again? A brief, strained smile touched his mouth. I'm trying very hard to be Ranger Mercer. Why? His expression turned serious again. Because wanting more doesn't mean I get to take advantage of the circumstances. The frustration that rose in me had nowhere useful to go because I understood him. That was the problem. If the road were open, I asked, would this be different? Cole's eyes shifted toward the dark window. I almost had a chance to make your situation here different. Before, he stopped. Before what? His gaze returned to mine. Nothing. That definitely wasn't nothing. Not tonight, Noah. There was my name again. Except now I knew exactly what existed underneath it. I stepped back, giving him the distance he seemed determined to maintain. The storm had not changed. The road was still buried. I was still his assistant. Cole was still my supervisor. But one thing could never return to what it had been before. He wanted me. I wanted him. And now the question waiting between us was no longer whether the attraction was real. It was whether any of it would survive the moment the door opened and I was finally free to leave. Morning made everything harder. Cole was already awake when I entered the common room, dressed for work, the radio beside him and 2 mugs on the table. Mine was the stronger coffee. That somehow irritated me more than if he had ignored me. "Morning," he said. Very professional. His eyes lifted to mine. I took the mug anyway. We worked through the station routine with almost painful efficiency. Cole gave instructions without hovering. I handled my checks without turning every sentence into an argument. If anyone had been watching, they might have believed nothing had happened between us. But I knew what his mouth felt like. There was no returning from that. Later, while we were checking equipment, Cole handed me responsibility for a section he had previously handled himself. "You want me to do this alone? You know what you're doing." I looked at him. 2 days earlier, I would have treated those words like a victory. Now they meant something different. "You trust me." "I do." "Then why are you acting like last night was a mistake?" His expression changed immediately. "It wasn't. You've barely looked at me all morning. Because looking at you is part of the problem." That stopped me. Cole set down what he was holding. "I'm not avoiding you because I regret kissing you. Could have fooled me. I'm being careful because I don't regret it." I said nothing. He stepped closer, but not close enough to touch. "You're still working under me. We're still isolated. If I pretend those things stopped mattering, because you kissed me back, then I'm exactly the kind of supervisor I don't want to be." The frustration in me softened despite my best effort to keep it. "So what happens? We do our jobs. And after?" His gaze held mine. "After depends on whether we still want the same thing when you actually have choices." There it was again. Freedom. The thing I had wanted since the snow closed the road had somehow become the thing I was afraid would erase whatever existed between us. The radio crackled before I could answer. Cole crossed the room and listened. The update was brief. Conditions were beginning to stabilize farther down the mountain. Crews had started making progress where the road was blocked, though nobody was promising immediate access. When the transmission ended, I noticed something in Cole's face I couldn't read. "So we might be getting out." "Might." I leaned against the table. "About what you almost told me last night." Cole's shoulders tightened. "The thing about making my situation different before the storm." "Noah." "No. You don't get to kiss me, admit you want me, and then use my name as a locked door." He was silent. I continued, quieter now. "Could I have been moved before the road closed?" Cole looked toward the window. Finally, he said, "There was a possibility of relocating temporary personnel if conditions justified it." My stomach tightened. "You knew?" "Yes." "Before I got trapped here?" "Yes." The answer landed harder than I expected. "Why didn't you tell me?" His gaze returned to mine. "It wasn't as simple as you think." "That's twice you've said that." "Because it's true." "Then explain it." Cole hesitated. For one moment I thought he would. Instead, he shook his head. "Not until I can give you the whole answer." I hated that answer. Mostly because I could see that withholding it was costing him something too. Outside, the wind had weakened. For the first time since I arrived, I could see farther between the trees. The storm was beginning to loosen its grip. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I looked at Cole and realized the road reopening would force an answer neither of us could postpone. The snow had given us an excuse to remain together. Soon we might not have one. By late afternoon, the storm had become something we could look at instead of something we had to listen to. Snow still covered everything beyond the station, but the wind had dropped, and the trees stood clearly against a pale sky. Cole was at the radio when the update came. I knew the news was different before he turned around. "They're reopening the access road tomorrow morning." I stared at him. For days, that sentence had been the answer to every practical problem we had. Now it felt like a deadline. "So that's it." "Looks like it." "And my assignment?" Cole's expression tightened. "There's another placement available if you want it." There it was. A choice. Exactly what he had said would matter. I folded my arms. Is that the same possibility you knew about before the storm? He didn't answer immediately. Cole. Yes. The room seemed suddenly too quiet. You could have sent me somewhere else. I could have recommended reassignment. But you didn't. No, why? He looked at me for a long moment, then pulled out the chair across from him. I stayed standing. Cole seemed to understand. Before the worst weather came in, I was asked whether keeping temporary staff here still made sense. This station had fewer resources than the alternative. And you said I should stay. I said you wanted to stay. I frowned. How did you know that? Because you made it clear from the beginning that you came here to do the job, not be protected from it. The answer should have satisfied me. Didn't. That's not the whole answer. No, Cole looked down briefly, then back at me. I told myself you deserved the chance to prove you could handle the assignment. Told yourself. His jaw tightened. Yes. I waited. Finally, he said, I also wanted you here. The words were quieter than the confession before our kiss. Somehow they hit harder. Before we were snowed in? Yes. Before the nights beside the stove. Before the coffee. Before the kiss. The storm had not created everything I had been trying to understand. It had only removed the distance Cole had been trying to keep. I sat down slowly. So when I asked about transfers, I already knew I'd had the chance to recommend one. And didn't. No. Because you wanted me around. His eyes stayed on mine. Yes. I should have felt relieved. Instead, another question immediately replaced the one he had answered. Would you have told me any of this if the road stayed closed another week? Cole exhaled. I don't know. That honesty hurt more than a safer answer would have. I stood again. Noah. I believe you wanted me here. That's not the problem. Then what is? I don't want to find out that you only know how to choose me when I'm your assistant and neither of us can go anywhere. Cole went silent. Tomorrow the road would open. The temporary placement was real. So was the possibility of leaving. And suddenly I knew what I had to do. I'm going to take the choice seriously. His face changed. You mean the other placement? I mean leaving. Cole looked as if he wanted to argue. He didn't. Maybe that was the most painful proof yet that he respected me. That evening, I gathered the belongings I had brought into the station when the snow first started falling. Nothing about the room had changed, but everything felt temporary again. Cole stayed on the other side of the station. He didn't ask me to stay. I didn't ask him to. The next morning, daylight spread across a world that was finally still. Beyond the station, the cleared route cut through the snow. For the first time since my arrival, there was a road out. I stood with my bag ready, looking through the window at freedom. And for the first time, leaving felt harder than being trapped. Cole was already outside when I carried my bag through the station door. Morning light reflected hard off the snow, almost painfully bright after days of gray windows and storm-darkened rooms. Beyond him, the reopened access road cut a clear path between the trees. Nothing blocked me anymore. Cole turned when he heard the door. His gaze dropped to my bag, then returned to my face. So you're leaving? It wasn't a question. I said I was taking the choice seriously. I know. He stepped closer, stopping several feet away. For once, there was no radio demanding his attention, no equipment. Between us, no storm making the decision for either of us. I need to say something before you go. I waited. Cole looked toward the road, then back at me. You don't owe me anything because of what happened here. I know. You don't owe me staying at this station. You don't owe me another kiss. And you definitely don't owe me an answer because I'm your supervisor. Something tightened in my chest. He continued before I could speak. If you take the other placement, I won't interfere. If you decide this was something that belonged to the storm, I'll accept that too. That's what you wanted to tell me? No, Cole took a breath. That's what I needed to make clear before I told you what I want. I stopped gripping the strap of my bag quite so tightly. What do you want? His eyes held mine. You. The same answer he had given me beside the stove. This time there was no snow trapping us inside. I want to see you when neither of us is stuck here. I want to take you somewhere that isn't this station and ask you on an actual date. And I want to find out what this is when you're not working under me and I don't have authority hanging over every decision we make." My throat tightened. Cole gave a short, humorless laugh. "I've spent days trying not to make the wrong choice for you. And now I'm making one for myself." He stepped closer. "I'm asking you to stay in my life, Noah. Not because you're my assistant. Not because the road closed. Because I want you there. For most of my life, leaving before things became difficult had felt like control. No failure if I left first. No rejection if I never stayed long enough to ask for something. The road behind Cole was open. I could take the other placement. I could turn everything that had happened into a strange, intense memory about the week I got snowed in with a forest ranger. It would be easy. That was exactly why I finally understood what I had told him beside the stove. I had come here because I was tired of easy exits. I lowered my bag into the snow. Cole's eyes followed it. "I'm not staying as your assistant just because you asked me to. I wouldn't let you. Good. And I'm not asking you to give up the other option without thinking. I have thought about it." His expression changed. I stepped toward him until there was barely any distance left between us. "You said we should find out whether we wanted the same thing when I actually had choices." "Yes." "Well, Ranger Mercer." His mouth almost smiled. "I have one now. And I choose this." I kissed him. For half a second, Cole stayed perfectly still, as if he needed to be certain I was the one closing the distance. Then his hand came to my face, careful in exactly the way I remembered, and he kissed me back. The first time we kissed, the storm had been pounding against the station and every road away from him had been buried. This time, sunlight fell across a cleared road only a few yards behind us. When we separated, Cole rested his forehead briefly against mine. "So," I said, "about that actual date." His smile finally appeared without disappearing immediately afterward. "You haven't even left yet. I'm planning ahead. That would be a first." I laughed. Nothing was trapping us anymore. That was what made the second kiss matter. The storm had forced us together. The open road proved we were choosing to stay that way. The road stayed open. That turned out to matter more than I expected. Within days, the station returned to its ordinary rhythm. Weather reports became reports instead of warnings. Equipment checks stopped feeling like preparations for another emergency. The windows showed trees again instead of walls of white, and vehicles could come and go without the mountain deciding otherwise. My work situation changed too. The arrangement was handled so that whatever happened between Cole and me no longer depended on the authority he had held over me when I arrived. He never treated that as an inconvenience, and he never tried to use what had happened during the storm as a reason for me to remain professionally tied to him. That mattered. So did something smaller. One afternoon, we were finishing a routine check when Cole handed me the list without looking over my shoulder. "You've got it." I glanced at him. "No supervision? You know, what you're doing. No finger count?" He gave me the look I had been waiting for. "Still 10. I held up both hands. "Remarkably." Cole shook his head, but he was smiling. There had been a time when I needed every task to prove something to him. Somewhere between the arguments, the storm, and the choices afterward, that had disappeared. He trusted me. More importantly, I trusted myself. Later, when the work was finished, I returned to the common room. The same stove was burning. The same chairs sat nearby. Outside the windows, snow still covered the forest, but the access road beyond it was clear. Cole was at the table. There was nothing keeping either of us in that room. No storm. No emergency. No professional obligation requiring us to spend another minute together. I poured myself coffee and took the chair near the stove. Cole finished what he was writing. Then he stood. For a moment, I expected him to head toward the other side of the station. Instead, he carried his mug over and sat beside me. The same choice he had made before I understood what it meant. Only now there was no mystery left in it. I looked at him. "You know there are other chairs." "I know. And the road's open." "I noticed. So technically, you're free to go." Cole turned toward me, that quiet smile appearing again. "So are you." When I had arrived, I thought staying through something difficult would prove I could endure it. I had been wrong. The important part wasn't learning how to stay when leaving was impossible. It was learning what and who I would choose when leaving became easy again. Outside, the road remained clear. Inside, Cole's shoulder rested lightly against mine. We weren't snowed in anymore. We were simply staying.